They say you learn a lot about a place by watching how it treats the people who move the slowest, the ones who aren't in a hurry because life already wore them down, the ones carrying plastic bags instead of briefcases, counting cash twice because every dollar already has a name on it. And, yeah, that's where this story starts, because on a bright afternoon, in a town like 1,000 others, an old black woman named Lena Brooks was walking home with $600 tucked carefully into her bag, and a police cruiser decided that was reason enough to stop her. The officer didn't pull up like he was worried about safety. He pulled up like he owned the sidewalk, leaned out the window with that half-smile people get when they already know how this is going to end, and said, "Ma'am, where you headed with that bag?" And you could hear it, right, that tone that isn't really a question, more like a reminder of who's supposed to answer and who's supposed to stay quiet. Lena stopped, not because she was scared, but because she'd lived long enough to know ignoring someone with a badge can cost you more than replying ever will. She looked at him steady clear and said, "Home." Just one word. Nothing extra. That wasn't enough for him. It never is. He stepped out of the car like he had nowhere else to be, circled her slowly, eyes on the bag like it was already open. "What's in there?" he asked, hand reaching before she could answer. No warrant, no explanation, just confidence, the kind that grows when no one ever pushes back. Lena felt that old familiar tightness in her chest, not panic, more like recognition. She'd felt it decades earlier when her husband was frisked for no reason, when neighbors disappeared behind squad cars and came back quieter, smaller. Inside the bag was $600 pension money folded neat in a plastic sleeve because paper tears and life doesn't wait. Electric bill, blood pressure meds, groceries that didn't come from the clearance shelf. That was her week, her plan, her control over a world that rarely gave her much of it. The officer pulled the money out and held it up like he'd found something dirty. He laughed. Actually laughed. "What do you need this much cash for?" he said. "At your age, you running something?" Yeah, that happened. People nearby heard it. A mother tugged her kid closer. Someone across the street suddenly remembered they had a phone call to make. Lena didn't laugh back. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't beg. She just said, calm as anything, "That's mine." The officer clicked his tongue, slid the bills into his pocket like it was nothing, and said, "I'll hold on to this for verification. You know how it is." And then he got back in his cruiser and drove off. No receipt, no name, just dust and silence. Lena stood there a second longer than she needed to, staring at the space where the car had been, feeling something heavier than shock settle into her bones. Her hand hurt. She looked down and realized her nails had broken skin. A thin line of blood traced her palm. She barely noticed. Pain like that doesn't announce itself when you've been carrying worse for years. What stayed with her wasn't the money. Not really. It was how easy it had been. The way he'd taken it like it was already his, like she was an open drawer no one would notice being emptied. She walked home. Inside her small house, the kind with a fence the city forgot and walls that remembered too much. She set the bag down on the table and stared at it. Empty. $600 gone in under a minute. She didn't call the police. That idea didn't even finish forming. She didn't call a lawyer. She didn't know one. She didn't cry. She'd done enough of that in her life. Instead, she opened a drawer she hadn't touched in years and pulled out an envelope, a pen, and a single sheet of paper. Her hands trembled not from age, but from the weight of a decision she'd been avoiding for almost a decade. There was only one person she was writing to. One person she'd sworn she'd never pull back into this town and its habits. Her son, Marcus. Marcus Brooks had been gone a long time. Not dead. Gone in that other way where letters come through strange channels and names vanish from public records. He'd grown up quiet, observant, the kind of kid teachers said had old eyes, like he'd already seen things most people hadn't. He joined the military young and left for places Lena only knew from headlines and prayers whispered into folded towels. When he left, she asked him for one thing. "Come back breathing," she said. He nodded. That was it. She wrote slow and careful. No dates, no addresses, just truth. She told him what happened. She told him about the money, but more than that, she told him how small it made her feel, how tired she was of swallowing moments like this and calling it survival. "I didn't call the police," she wrote. "I called you. Do what you think is right. I won't stop you." She folded the letter neatly and sealed it like a confession, half a world away. Marcus read it in under a minute. He didn't curse, he didn't punch anything. He just closed his eyes and let out a slow breath, the kind you take before stepping into something you can't step back from. The man he was now wasn't built for rage. He was built for focus. And focus, when it lands on the right target, can be dangerous. Marcus came home quietly. No uniform, no announcement, no big return. He rented a car under a different name and drove through town like a stranger watching everything. He didn't go straight to his mother. First, he needed to see the place she'd been surviving in while he was gone. He noticed how conversations died when a cruiser passed, how people looked down, like the ground had suddenly become interesting. Fear had learned to blend in here, you know what I mean? It wore normal clothes. He started talking to people gently without accusation, at a corner store, outside a church, at a bus stop where the bench paint was peeling. He asked simple questions. What happened to you? And people answered. They told him about the same officer. Different days, same routine. Stops with no tickets. Searches with no cameras. Money that vanished. Complaints that went nowhere. It wasn't random, it was patterned. Marcus didn't need a weapon. He needed a map. He made one. Red marks for stops. Blue for camera failures. Long, blank spaces where nothing was ever recorded. Those blank spots mattered most. He learned the officer Cal Mercer had transferred in years earlier with a record that looked clean because someone had made sure it did. Gaps, reassignments, protection. Mercer wasn't bold because he was stupid. He was bold because he'd been allowed to be. So Marcus touched the system without laying a hand on it. He set a test. An older man with a limp, a wallet that looked just visible enough. A walk down 3rd Street at exactly the right time. Right on schedule, Mercer rolled up. Same confidence, same reach. When he opened the wallet, he found a note wrapped around a single bill. It read, "Someone is paying attention." That was all. Marcus didn't need more. Mercer's face told the rest of the story. Not fear yet. Something close. The first crack. Things started moving fast and slow at the same time. Flyers appeared, no names, just dates and numbers. A blog picked it up, then another. People started filing complaints together instead of alone using templates Marcus shared that made them harder to bury. The town shifted not loudly but noticeably. Officers hesitated. Supervisors stalled. Meetings dragged on. Silence stopped working like it used to. Lena watched it all from her window. Knitting needles paused, heart steady. Marcus finally came home one evening and sat across from her at the table like he used to. She touched his face once gentle. "You look tired," she said. He smiled a little. "I am," he said. "But it's almost done." She shook her head. "No," she said softly. "It's just started." The investigation didn't end with sirens or dramatic arrests. It ended with resignations, with old records reopened, with a police chief standing at a podium saying, "We failed to recognize patterns." Mercer's badge was left on a desk and nobody rushed to pick it up. He tried to apologize once, showed up at Marcus's door, eyes hollow, words rehearsed. Marcus listened, then said quietly, "You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry it worked." And that was it. The door closed without a slam. Graybridge didn't turn into some perfect place overnight. Towns don't. But something changed. People started looking up more. Kids asked questions. Elders wrote things down. Silence stopped being the default response. Lena eventually got her money back in the form of a restitution check with a long apology letter she didn't bother reading. She framed the check instead, not for the amount, for what it proved. Marcus left again, not because he had to, but because his work there was done. He hugged his mother and she said, "You didn't save me." He nodded. "I know," he said. "You saved yourself. So let me ask you something. If you saw an old woman stopped on your street at noon, her bag searched her dignity, pocketed like loose change, what would you do? Would you look away because it's easier? Would you record it? Would you step in? And if you've lived long enough to watch small abuses turn into habits, what do you owe the people coming after you? Drop your thoughts below. Argue if you need to. Tell your story. Because the only thing worse than being watched by the wrong people is being ignored by the right ones.